Hi everyone, in this video we're going to have a brief discussion of effective lesson planning as well as unit design. This is meant to be multidisciplinary, although it will focus on strong reading instruction and strong writing instruction that can tie across content areas regardless of whether you're an English teacher, science teacher, math teacher, social studies teacher, etc. I want you to know what I mean by unit of instruction before I begin. A unit of instruction is basically a series of lesson plans that are tied together, linked by a common theme. What does it mean to be human? We're studying Macbeth, and here are the themes that we're studying this week for Macbeth. We're studying what it means for the character Macbeth to be a villain, for instance. We're studying revenge this week. Again, a common theme. Typically, a unit of instruction might be, let's say, 3 to 5 lesson plans linked together by a theme. That's what I mean by a unit of instruction in its simplest possible sense. So here's what guides our discussion in this video. I want you to know that choice is a very important part of student motivation, and also questions, inquiry, are a very important part of student motivation. I want you to remember that it is important for students to see that their lesson plans are linked by a common theme. You don't want your lessons from one day to the next to be disjointed so that students don't know what we're doing from one day to the next. They don't see the point. If your lessons are linked with a common theme, with common standards, with a common purpose, then it will help your students to be focused and motivated. We'll study more about the reading workshop as we go along, but I want you to consider the possibility of using reading workshops in your classes, regardless of what subject area you teach. The simplest explanation for what a reading workshop is, and you can find more about this by scholars such as Lucy Calkins. A reading workshop is, Nancy Atwell, is an extended amount of time focused on skills related to reading. For instance, you might have students focus on comprehension of what they read, or the practice of reading strategies as they're reading a text for an extended amount of time, such as 20 minutes or 30 minutes. The goal of a good reading workshop is engagement in the text as well as motivation to want to read. Now, when we talk about motivation, again, simplest possible sense, you've got extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation means that you're motivated to read for the purpose of a reward or avoidance of a punishment. For instance, you're motivated to read because of the grade, or you're motivated to read because of the possibility of a pizza party. For instance, those are extrinsic forms of motivation. Intrinsic motivation means that you are internally motivated to read for its own sake. Now, there are other ways of looking at motivation besides just simply extrinsic versus intrinsic. For instance, we talk about often the term self-efficacy. Self-efficacy means basically that you are confident in your ability to, in this case, read the text with success. Efficacy is very context and task specific. Just because you have a high level of efficacy to read one particular text with success doesn't necessarily mean that that translates into all text that you're ever going to read. For instance, you might have students that have a high level of self-efficacy to read sports articles with success, but you give them a physics journal and maybe they might have a lower level of self-efficacy. In my case, because remember, efficacy is very task specific. I have a high level of efficacy to do things that I already know that I'm good at. For instance, to be an English teacher or a reading teacher, or to engage in certain forms of assessment of student learning, or to be a professor, or to engage in the type of scholarly writing that I tend to do. Fine, I've got a very high level of self efficacy. But you ask me to sing an opera, I've got a low level of self efficacy, or other forms of singing. Most people I know would say that I've got a bad singing voice. So, again, self efficacy is a confidence to do a certain task with success. It is very much task specific. It is a theory of motivation because, and again, don't confuse that. Efficacy is not identity. Efficacy is motivation for the following reason. If you are confident in your ability to do a task with success, for instance, to read with success, it means you're going to be more motivated intrinsically to do that. If you have a high level of confidence in your ability to read successfully, that means that when you come across more challenges, you will be more motivated. You will stick to it. On the other hand, if you have a low level of confidence in your ability to read with success, you're going to be less motivated. You're probably going to find excuses to avoid it. And when you come across challenges, you're probably going to be more likely to give up. That's true for all of us, not just in reading. For instance, in the type of writing, the type of scholarship that I do, when I come across challenges, I'm more likely to be motivated. I'm going to want to do it, and I'm going to stick to it across challenges because things I know that I'm good at, I'm more motivated to do it. On the other hand, you ask me to sing, and even if it's something that other people can do easily, even if it's something that most people would find very fun, I'm going to be less motivated because I have low self-efficacy in that area. Um, so again, notice that there's various ways of talking about motivation, and the more confident you can get a student to think about to be confident that they can do a specific task with success, it translates into higher motivation. When we talk about engagement, engagement is not necessarily the same thing as motivation, but if you are motivated, you're more likely to become engaged in a task. Engagement in its basic rawest form means that you are focused on a specific activity, without distraction. You're doing a task without being distracted. Um, People that are highly engaged and highly motivated will tend to comprehend what they read with higher levels of skill. You want to engage students in various types of reading activities, various genres, for instance, of books. You want to engage them in journals, book clubs, various forms of analysis. You might have stations around the room where students move around from time to time. One station in one part of the room might be fiction station. Another part of the room might be nonfiction. Another part of the room might be science. Another part of the room might be sports. Another part of the room might be fashion, whatever. Another part of the room might be animals. So again, this varies by year level. A lot of what I'm talking about is related to middle school, since of course most of the classes I teach are middle school oriented. You might have a key theme that we're studying. Usually your theme would be related to other material that you are working on during the week with that course. You want to plan your reading activities very carefully. Remember, it is very important to have a unity of theme. For instance, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to come of age as an adolescent? What does this particular experience, what does action adventure mean within the plot? Think of if you're studying Macbeth, what is the nature of ambition and how can ambition corrupt? Absolutely. In the case of Macbeth, for those of you that are familiar with the story of Macbeth from Shakespeare, make your plans in advance. Don't just be knee jerking it. Organize your materials in advance. Plan your activities for the class very carefully. When I talk about flow, um, again, flow can have different meanings. For those of you that have not studied psychology yet, one way in which you can talk about flow is that you are engaged in the activity purposefully without distraction. We can also talk about what's called flow theory from psychology. Flow in psychology means that you are engaged in a activity such as reading without distracting, with a high level of focus, high level of concentration to the point where you might lose track of time. Such a sense of flow is very much related to high level of skill. For instance, if you are reading without distraction, and you are reading to the utmost of your cognitive abilities, you're more likely to comprehend that text at a high level. You want to check out text in advance. You want to plan very carefully. Don't wait for copiers at the copy machine and expect that the copy machine won't break. You want to be well prepared. Okay, so this was, if I'm doing this presentation live with you, I would do this, but I want you to pause for a second, pretend for a moment that we're having a discussion, if you will. Think of opportunities for multi-genre reading. Think of times in the past when your teachers might have engaged in multi-genre reading. What worked? What didn't work? What lessons might you learn from times when multi-genre reading might not have worked? What lessons can you learn from your own past experience when multi-genre reading did work? Multi-genre reading, in a nutshell, means that you've got your students reading multiple genres of text, for instance, fiction and nonfiction. We can also talk about multi-genre writing in multiple genres such as fiction and nonfiction. Unity of theme is vital so that students can see the connections to be made. You want to think in advance of an idea for a lesson that students will be exploring, a key question that students might want to explore, such as what is the nature of ambition? How can ambition be corrupting? How can greed be corrupting, for instance? Key questions that students are exploring. You want to think of how students can experience your lessons. This can include multi sensory experiences, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, hearing. Let students move around, let students act, let students perform, let students get involved in digital storytelling, perhaps. This is where students make up a story of their own based upon what they've been studying using internet, using technology for sources. We'll explore that later as we go through the course. You want to help students see the big picture in what they're studying. This famous quote, each genre is a color slide, complete in itself, possessing its own satisfying composition, but working together in concert with others to create a single literary experience. Same thing can go for your units of instruction. Each lesson plan can be its own color slide, if you will, but they weave together within this, 3 to 5 day unit that creates an overall tapestry for students, and your students ought to be able to see the connections. A writing workshop, and we'll study that more as we go further into the course, is an extended amount of time focused on skills of writing. And you might focus on a particular skill in a particular day of a workshop. One day might focus on the use of commas. Another day might focus on other aspects of grammar. Another day might focus on expressive writing. Another day might focus on use of imagery in your writing. So it's an extended amount of time focusing on a particular skill within writing. The goal again includes engagement and motivation to engage in writing. You want to increase student analysis as well as skill level as they write. You might have students do dialogue, poetry, journal entries, searches with the internet. For instance, there's all kinds of various ways in which you can do a writing workshop. Okay, so again, think of on your own times in which you've been engaged in writing workshops or the use of writing in multiple genres. Why did the activity work or why did the activity fail? What lessons can be learned? We want to think about good solid lesson design and unit design. And again, for the purpose of this discussion, think of a unit as basically 3 to 5 lesson plans linked together by a common theme. There's a chapter that I'm going to put on Blackboard for you to read. Now, for those of you that are reading this Magarinsky text, as well as the other text that I've assigned for this unit, reading the Smith and Wilhelm chapter will be optional, but I'm also making the Smith and Wilhelm chapter that goes along with this discussion as a possible substitute for this Magarinsky text. This is basically a step, but if you're reading Magarinsky, this discussion on this video will help you and it goes along with your chapter reading this semester. You want to start with a framing question, an open-ended question for students to explore, a big why question. If you're studying science, for instance, why does a particular principle of science work in such a way? If you're studying Macbeth, why does Macbeth make certain choices? What is the nature of courage? Why do humans commit evil actions? If you're studying literature, for instance, an exploratory framing question that helps students to focus. You want students to engage in a real-world task that involves constructing responses to this question. The results can include multi-genre writing, social action projects, or problem solving. What will the students know? What do they need to know? What will the students do? How will they demonstrate mastery of your objectives and your skills? These are advanced questions that you want to ask as you do your lesson planning. You want to create a sequence of instructional activities. Start with what the students can accomplish. Think of their needs, think of their interests, think of their abilities. Again, you're not wanting to stump students. You're wanting to meet them where they're at. Next, you want to sequence your activities so that students can develop further expertise drawing on their background knowledge. Remember, we'll be learning about this more as we go further in this course. Right now, I'm introducing you to basics. So as you do your lesson plan, you want to start with a setup, sometimes phrased if you're in Missouri as a do now, sometimes phrased as a gateway activity, or front loading. Motivate students with an essential question that students are going to explore as they walk in the door during the first 2 to 3 minutes of class. You want to set significant stopping points as students move further into the lesson. So let's say 10, 15 minutes into the course, have a stopping point where students can demonstrate their grasp of these standards and these goals so far. Because the last thing you want to do is get 40 minutes into a lesson and then realize that students are lost. So these stopping points are opportunities for students to demonstrate their progress, There are also little mini assessment points you can assess to see whether students are understanding or not. You want to have a sequence in order to scaffold. A scaffold is basically, and we'll learn more about that term as we go along, think of it as a help. Think of it as a ladder that students climb. If, to use a metaphor here, if a person is climbing a ladder and they might be in danger of falling from that ladder, you might provide that person with a helping hand, or you might provide that student with with a with a belt and a rope to make sure that person doesn't fall. These are forms of assistance that help a person reach a goal. For instance, if a person is wanting to get on top of a roof, it's not likely that that person will be able to just simply jump from the ground to the roof without help. A scaffold is basically various forms of assistance that you provide students in order to help the students learn and gain their expertise. Scaffolding is not meant to be permanent. The ultimate goal is independence for students as they gain greater expertise. So again, the point of a scaffold isn't to basically get students to have a sense of learned helplessness. The importance of a scaffold is to guide students toward increasing expertise, increasing independence in increasingly difficult tasks. You want to model work for students as students watch what you're doing. You want to mentor students, and you want to monitor the students' work. As we go further into this course, we're going to work on designing lessons that are inquiry-based. You might consider using multiple genres of reading or multiple genres of writing. The references that I've got in this PowerPoint, you can feel free to look them up on your own. What I've got in purple font is meant to be especially important, especially helpful to you as kind of a supplement. So here are some questions that you can possibly ask as you get into your lesson planning. These are the 5 features of flow. Remember, flow is basically a psychological state of intense concentration, intense focus, so much so that you might possibly lose track of time, and it is associated with high use of skill to the optimum of your ability. These are some questions that you might ask yourself as you're doing your lesson plans. Will students gain a sense of competence? Will they gain a sense of control over what they're doing? Is there an appropriate level of challenge for the students? Not so challenging that students will get frustrated, not so easy that students will get bored. Do you provide clear goals and clear feedback for your students? Do they know exactly what they need to be doing? And are you going to be providing appropriate feedback to the students on their growth? Can the students focus on an immediate result? You don't want your goals to be so far-reaching, so long-term, that students aren't able to get immediate feedback on their progress. Is there also opportunity for social or peer-based learning and peer interaction from time to time? Okay, and that's my introduction to solid lesson planning. I'm not taking you through the lesson planning rubric right now. I just wanted you to have a little bit of an introduction. Hope you enjoyed this.